I will warn you that today's presentation is all about theories, all right? So we're doing a lot of groundwork to understand why we communicate the way we do and how, and why we communicate how we do it as well. So a theory is like a model or an explanation of something that's really difficult to see in person. You know, it's like the model of the atom or the model of a cell, right? It's hard to see those unless you've got a microscope or some other elements. So models are created, and that's what we do in communication studies as well. You can see that we are in chapter 2.2, and these are the theories that I want to go over. These theories are sometimes no duh, they make a whole lot of sense, but even if they are, oh yeah, this makes sense, how often do we stop, think about it, and apply it? Or try to understand it for self-improvement or growth or to enhance or improve relationships with people, right? So the first one we're going to look at is what's called the looking glass self, all right, which is what Tony referred to as looking at himself in a mirror. And that's Cooley's looking glass self, and I'm going to diagram it here. It's also in your book, but I'm going to make some modifications to it. In the looking glass self, we have a lot of influencers to help us see ourselves. And in communication, we see ourselves through how people communicate with us. So for instance, if a child is constantly bullied or is put down at home or said, you know, you're worthless, you're never going to amount to anything, that starts to hurt the person's self-esteem, and they start to believe it. If you say it often enough at a child or even to an adult, they start to believe it, all right, repetition. So what we want to do is to recognize when it is somebody else's script in their brain that we don't have to put into our brain. Or sometimes we do want to put it into our brain. And so what we're going to talk about is a concept which is in motivation theory is locus of control. All right, so anybody taking Psychology 150? You might remember this one. All right, remember locus of control? Okay, have you gotten there yet? Okay. Locus of control means the center of your control. Do you believe that you control yourself? Or do you believe more like a victim that others control you? So let me ask, do you believe you control yourself? You do. Okay. Do you believe you control yourself? Tony? Yep. You control yourself. So you control your own thoughts, your own actions, your own beliefs. All right? You believe in systemic racism. You believe that there is inherent systematic racism in the United States. It's a tough question. Do you believe that there is an advantage to being a white male over being an African American male? Do you believe that there is a sexism where there's an advantage being a male over a female with jobs and salaries? Yes? Okay? That's systemicism. And it might be racism, it might be sexism, I'm of the protected class of age. It might be ageism, where people are against us because they think we're old and incompetent. Okay, those are systemic, oftentimes, in policies and procedures and hiring practices, etc. So, if you believe that you are always a victim to other people's systems, right, then your locus control is external. That means that outside of you is influencing how you can control your life. If you believe that the locus of control, like you guys all answered, is inside ourselves, then that means that your locus of control is internal. You are a master or a mistress of your own destiny. But if you are honest and realize that language creates reality, you're going to recognize that sometimes it's a combination. All right? And that's when, as communication scholars, we say, when it is this way, is it just? Is it fair? Question mark. Right? So if we have Cooley's looking glass self that says, when I listen to how people talk to me, and if they say, no, you can't do that, okay, women don't know anything about that. They can't be in the STEM field, all right? Then you are allowing others' prejudices or preconceived ideas or misunderstandings affect who you are. So I love the fact that you all believe that you're not victims. I love that. Because we don't want to be victims. But we do want to be awake and know when sometimes there is some external factors that will influence our successes. And that's when we, as wonderful citizens, are going to say, stop, that is not right. And that's when we get into our democracy and we work on laws and we work on social justice campaigns. So let's identify what these things are. All right. Over here, I have to look at my notes to make sure I do it correctly. You have your family. Your family is your first, especially your primary caregiver, is the first to influence how you see yourself. So when the primary caregiver says, you're being a very good little boy, or you're being a very good little girl, or that's the way little girls should behave at parties, or that's the way you should behave on the playground. That is your positive reinforcement, and that gives you a feeling, okay, here is your face. Not going to put a happy face on it yet. There is you who starts to feed in to who you are in your self-esteem, right? Now, you also have friends, which is your social network. And as you become adults, it will, or even you go to school, it may be your teachers. And it could be your friends on the playground, or you get older and it could be the people who you date, or it might be the organizations that you join, the basketball team, the army, all these different groups. So there is a social network, and how the people, members of this, talk to you will give you an impression of how they view you, right? And then you get that reflection back, because if they love you and they say good things about you, you are very smart, you did a really good job on the court, you are an excellent soldier, those kinds of things. Then you start that to sink in and become truth to you. That becomes a script, a schema. Okay? Is this making sense? All right. Now, working all along in this, as we've talked about earlier, is the intrapersonal communication that you have with yourself. All right, so as you were doing the I am activity, that was an opportunity for you to have a conversation with yourself to identify what kind of roles you play, what kind of talents you have, what kind of feelings you experience, etc. That's intrapersonal. That's going to be the psychology, right? So that's the real inside psychology of who you are. And that has a lot to do with neurolinguistics. It has a lot to do with your, the neurons and how everything is working inside your brain as well. I mean, chemical, especially if somebody is bipolar or has other kinds of depression or something. Now, this is a critical one, and this is one that's going to help you to understand what group you want to study for your term project. And this is your culture. Now, let me give you the definition that communication studies use to define culture, because it's different than anthropology or some other classes, all right? In our discipline, culture, all right, represents how we do, say, not do, and not say around here that is okay. All right? That's how we define it. So it's how do you talk? All right? When do you talk? What do you do? These are what we call behaviors, observable behaviors. I can see when you're quiet. I can see when you speak. I can see when you flip me off. I can see all those things, right? Those are behaviors. I can count it. I can see it. I can replay it back, etc. Around here means the context. So you have a culture on your Flyers basketball team, all right? Tony had a culture in the Army, but he even had subcultures in the battalions that he worked in, etc., and in the units, all right? So you have this big culture, and then you have subcultures, and then subcultures, okay? Because how you mess around or communicate with people in your immediate unit might be very different than when you are interacting with others at higher ups or in a different setting. Yes? Okay. Good, good. This is the we. This is everybody in that community. And the we is very important. Because the we means that it's all of the people in this body, in the culture and or in the subculture, etc. So it's the we. And you can see how the we is going to influence the I. Yes? All right, good. And the how is linked to what is okay. Okay means that it's acceptable. You're not going to be put in jail. You're not going to be ostracized. You're not going to be fined money. You are conforming to the rules of the group, of the society, all right, to be accepted. So basically, when we look at culture, we are looking at what are the attitudes of the people there? What are the values that the community share? And what are the beliefs that people share? And as you all know, it's usually on a continuum of far left, far right, and who knows where between. But the group has decided to believe in it. And collectively, they are part of it. So can you imagine how this I will respond if you commit what's known as a taboo in this group? All right, so what's a taboo? What is a taboo? Against what? That's right. It's not okay in any way, shape, or form. All right? And there's many of them here in the United States. And some people think we're very open, but we're not. All right? Rape is an example of something that is taboo and not okay. Right? Incest is not okay. All right? A taboo. And all those things can result in a consequence. Right? So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that later. So if the person in the center of this looking glass commits a taboo, then that person is not going to fit in anymore. And that person's self-esteem or self-understanding, self-concept can be questioned. Now, let's think about that for a moment. Identity, all right, is a part of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to write here identity, because how you identify yourself can be at odds with what is the norm. Let's talk for a moment about homosexuality. Okay. So in many families, it's no big deal. In other families, that person is going to possibly be ostracized, kicked out of the family unit, of the group, shunned, yelled and screamed at, or disowned, okay, right? So again, we have all these variables on this continuum of what could happen with somebody who self-identifies as being a homosexual or transgender or another element that that family does not recognize as okay. All right? Now, it might also be a social network that doesn't see it as okay. A religious group, all right? So if the family has raised you in a particular religion that does not have homosexuality as okay, then the communication from this network coming in for this person's identity is going to be hurtful, hard to accept, etc. So now this person in the middle, trying to understand identity, who am I? You know, I have these feelings that people are saying, and my family are saying, are not okay. But my psychology is, I'm talking to myself, and it's like, but this is me. This is who I identify with. I love a person of the same identified sex. All right? So, you see, are you guys getting how complex this all is? and how we are influenced by what other people think and feel and say. All right? So, to wrap this up, because I don't want to talk too long on camera, I want to connect this to a couple of things. We have another theory called self-discrepancy theory. In the self-discrepancy theory, there's like a triad. And in that triad, let me get the words right. Okay. There is what's known as an ideal person. There is what's known as our actual person. And there is also known as the ought, O-U-G-H-T person. All right? And ought simply means should be. This is how a person ought to be. This is how a person should be. All right? So again, when we look at identity, you can see how this theory, when we look at the self-discrepancy theory, I see myself as a wonderful human being, capable of love, capable of being just an amazing contributor to society, etc. And my actual self is I have to hide that I am a homosexual because I would be kicked out of my family if I was to come forward. And part of the reason is because my social network, my places at work, my family, friends, etc., are saying I ought to change. I ought to be different. Ouch. So this person's identity is a struggle, right? So we as humans do the social comparison theory. And when we compare ourselves, especially our identity, with others, it becomes a me versus others' perceptions. Versus. And when you hear the term versus, what comes to mind? Versus. All of the above. Excellent. So it's against. It's one against other. And you think about it in just athletic terms, Sandhills Flyers versus another team, right? That versus is another one of those interpretations of words that there's going to be a conflict. One is against the other, almost the fight, all right, that needs or wants to be resolved in some way. And social comparison theory says that we strive to do what we can to resolve this. And oftentimes we do that by comparing ourselves to our best friend or to another player on the field, on the court, or to the colleagues whose desk is right next to mine, or my brother. And so the list goes on and on in terms of how we do that. The problem with this theory is the theory is accurate, but the problem when people buy into this is the psychology of the individual is that oftentimes a person will come up less than the other person. You'll come up short pun intended for me. So this is when people, through whether it's personal counseling or it's personal coaching or what have you, will work to try and reconcile this so that they can be more in concert versus against. And they start to eliminate some social comparison. The healthiest people don't compare themselves against others. The healthiest people, according to this concept, is you compare yourself to the version of you last year or last week. Are you, as a personal individual, evolving and growing and becoming more informed, etc.? Okay? So as you are thinking about your project, any one of these kinds of theories might be helpful in understanding why you may see a particular group of people as less than yourself. Are you comparing them? Are you using any of these? And should you, instead of doing it as a versus or a less than, to focus on what we call our positives, our similarities, our commonality of human beings? What are the things that we share in common? And dialogue about the things that are different. All right? So when we look at motivators, to wrap this up, there are two types of primary motivators. There's what we call extrinsic and intrinsic. If Darius wants to be MVP for the season, does Darius want it for himself to demonstrate I did it, I worked my butt off, I am accomplished, and I'm proud of myself, and I did this with my own locus of control, with practice, 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 practice. Right? Or is he doing it because he wants to get a scholarship? He wants his mom and dad to be proud of him. He wants to eventually make a whole lot of money and get in the NBA. Those are out of his control wants. And he is allowing extrinsic factors to motivate him to perform. So my question will always be with somebody, what has the greatest value and what has the longest term impact on you? What do you think is the answer? What's of greatest value and will have the longest impact, long-term impact on you? Doing things because it's important to you personally, you value it, or because you want the money? Can you answer it? You want self-satisfaction, or do you want to wear a lot of bling? Okay, so you think intrinsic. Okay, why?
I'm just doing it for me. I'm not doing it for others. So you feel like the extra is like feels like money, right?
Yeah, or others.
Feel like well, yeah, I do stuff.
That's you?
Uh,
You're the intrinsic. And you want to do it for yourself. Why?
because at the end of the day, like by myself and then so I do it. Yeah, people come to us.
That's right. Very good. Extrinsic motivators are what we call fleeting. They come and they go, right? Money may come and money may go. Persons in your life may come in, but they may go. There's lots of things that you could, be, what you want, but why? Okay, so for instance, I was highly motivated to become a vice president by the time I was 40 years old. And it was for my self-esteem. I knew I was going to make more money, and I knew I would make my mom proud, right? But I did it because I needed to say that little Kathy Kruska could do it. It was all about my self-satisfaction. And then when I made senior vice president, that was when I was, well, I'm good. Done now. All right, good job. Let me turn this off.